Don't open that envelope until after the reception, whatever you do. And do not let him know you've seen it." The hotel concierge said it so quietly, I almost thought I'd imagined it. She was maybe 60, gray hair pinned back, the kind of woman who looks like she's seen everything and forgotten none of it. She pressed the envelope into my hand, a cream-colored thing, no name on the outside, and walked away before I could ask a single question. I stood in the lobby of the Marriott in downtown Nashville in my wedding dress, 30 minutes before my own reception, holding something I didn't understand. My name is Sable Fontaine. I was 29 years old, and that afternoon I was the happiest I had ever been in my life, or so I thought. My husband and I had just gotten married in the Rose Garden on the hotel's third-floor terrace. 60 guests. Late September sun. A string quartet playing something I'd cried through twice in rehearsal. He'd looked at me at the altar like I was the only woman on the planet, and I had believed it so completely that I didn't even think to question it. I tucked the envelope into my bouquet and went to find my maid of honor to unzip me so I could get into my reception dress. I told myself I'd look at it later. I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe a note from a hotel guest who'd watched the ceremony from below, or a local vendor trying to get business. I was good at talking myself out of worry. I had been practicing that skill for 2 years. The reception was beautiful. The food was perfect. My father danced with me to the same song he'd danced to with my mother at their wedding, and I cried for real that time, not the rehearsal kind. My husband stood at the edge of the dance floor watching us, and when my father walked me back and squeezed my hand and whispered, "Take care of yourself, baby," I thought he meant it in the general, fatherly way. He didn't. I found out later that my father had been trying to tell me something for 3 months, that he'd hired someone, that there were photographs, that he couldn't bring himself to show me because he wasn't sure I would believe him and he was terrified of what it would do to me if I didn't. But that's the end of the story. Let me tell you the middle. I found a quiet corner of the hotel bar around 9 o'clock, when the speeches were done and the dancing had turned chaotic. My sister-in-law was monopolizing the DJ. My college roommate was already on her second slice of cake. I slipped away, sat down on a low velvet chair near the window overlooking Broadway, and I opened the envelope. Inside was a single photograph, printed on regular paper, the kind you'd print at a Walgreens in a hurry. It showed my husband. He was standing in a hotel hallway, not this hotel, a different one, the Hampton Inn logo visible on the wall placard behind him. He was laughing. His arm was around a woman I didn't know. Except I did know her. I just hadn't placed her yet. I turned the photo over. On the back, in neat small handwriting, room 412. He checked in 2 nights ago. She's still here. The noise from the reception floated in around the corner. Clinking glasses and bad pop music and my aunt doing her signature loud laugh. I stared at the photo. I turned it back over. I stared at the woman. She was pretty. Dark hair, pale skin, wearing a blazer like she'd just come from somewhere professional. She looked comfortable with him. Not like someone sneaking around, like someone who belonged there. And then it clicked. I had met her once, at his company's holiday party 14 months ago. She'd been introduced to me as a colleague. He'd said her name once, and I hadn't thought about her since. She worked in his office. His firm had about 40 employees, and I'd only ever met a handful of them, and she had been unremarkable to me in the way that people are when you have no reason to pay attention. I had every reason now. My first instinct was the obvious one. March back into that reception, find him on the dance floor, and hold that photograph up where everyone could see it. 60 people. My family. His family. The photographer we'd paid $3,000. Do it right there, right then. I didn't move. I don't fully understand why even now. Some part of me that was colder and quieter than the rest of me said, not yet. Said, you don't know everything. Said, if you blow this up right now, you lose every advantage you have. I'm not a strategic person by nature. I'm a middle school science teacher. I spend my days explaining the water cycle to 12-year-olds and mediating arguments about whose turn it is to use the good microscope. I am not someone who thinks 3 moves ahead, but sitting in that bar, in my reception dress, with that photograph in my hand, something in me went very, very quiet. And in that quiet I started thinking clearly. I knew a few things. The joint account we'd opened for the honeymoon had a significant balance. I'd deposited the money from the sale of my condo into it 3 weeks before the wedding, because he'd suggested we use it to cover the trip and then move into his place when we got back. Nearly $40,000. It had made sense at the time. It made a different kind of sense now. I also knew that I had not yet signed the beneficiary paperwork his financial advisor had emailed me. The advisor was a friend of his, someone he'd known since college, and I'd kept meaning to fill out the forms and kept not getting to it. My husband had mentioned it twice in the last week, twice. Not nagging exactly, but present, noticeable. The kind of mention that you don't register as a pattern until suddenly you do. I put the photograph in my clutch. I smoothed my dress. I walked back into the reception and I smiled at everyone. And I danced with my husband 3 more times, and I kissed him on the cheek when he whispered that I was the most beautiful woman in any room he'd ever been in. Hook set, I thought, and I didn't even fully know what I was doing yet. We flew to Cancun the next morning. I watched him sleep on the plane, and I thought about the photograph, and I thought about the woman in the blazer, and I thought about $40,000 sitting in an account with both our names on it. I thought about the beneficiary forms I hadn't signed. I thought about the concierge's face when she pressed that envelope into my hand. The way she'd looked at me, with something that wasn't pity exactly, but close to it. Like she was sorry. Like she already knew how this was going to go. I used the plane's Wi-Fi. I know that sounds insane, but I had 4 hours and a husband who sleeps like he's been sedated, and I needed information. I emailed my father. Just 3 words. Did you know? He replied in 11 minutes. Call me when you land. I love you. That was enough. When we got to the resort, I was present. I swam with him. I ate dinner at the beachfront restaurant. I laughed at his jokes. I let him take photos of me in the water and post them. I was the perfect honeymooning wife, and I was running a quiet, parallel calculation the entire time. On the second day, while he was at the swim-up bar talking to another couple we'd met at breakfast, I called my father from the beach. He'd had my husband looked into. Not by some shady internet service, by an actual licensed private investigator, a woman his attorney had used before. She'd started 3 months before the wedding, after my father noticed something at our engagement party he couldn't shake. My husband had stepped outside to take a call and been gone for 40 minutes, and when he came back he was different, quieter, and my father had watched him for the rest of the night and not liked what he saw. The PI had documented 6 meetings with the woman from the photograph. 3 at her apartment in East Nashville, 2 at the Hampton Inn, 1 at a restaurant in Franklin where he'd paid cash. She'd been his girlfriend before we met. He had never fully ended it. He had apparently been managing 2 relationships simultaneously for the entirety of the time I'd known him. There was more. He had done something similar before, with a woman in Atlanta he'd dated for 3 years. That relationship had ended with her filing a civil lawsuit over funds. She claimed he'd pressured her to move into a shared investment account before they'd broken up. The case had been settled quietly. My father's PI had found the court record. I sat on that beach in Cancun, and I watched my husband laughing with strangers 40 feet away, easy and charming and warm, and I felt something shift in my chest that I still don't have a precise word for. It wasn't heartbreak. Heartbreak had happened earlier, somewhere over the Gulf of Mexico, private and fast, like a bone snapping clean. This was something else. This was clarity. I called my father back and I said, "Don't do anything yet. Give me a week." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You sure?" "I'm sure," I said. "I need to handle something first." That evening I told my husband I thought we should go over the honeymoon account together. Just to make sure everything was set up right, transfer fees, exchange rates, all of that. He agreed immediately, pleasantly, with the particular kind of ease that I now recognized as practiced. We sat on the balcony of our suite with his laptop, and I watched him navigate to the account. I memorized what I saw: account number, routing number, current balance. I asked one question about the transfer settings and let him explain it, and I nodded and said, "That makes sense." Later, after he was asleep, I went into the bathroom and I wrote everything down. The next morning I called my bank directly, not our joint bank, my personal bank, where I still had an individual checking account, because I had been meaning to close it and hadn't gotten around to it. I explained the situation to the fraud and security department. I explained it again to a supervisor. I was calm and specific, and I had the account number and I had the documentation my father's PI had sent over the night before, forwarded to my email, including the court record from Atlanta. They froze the joint account pending review. It took about 6 hours for my husband to notice. We'd gone on a catamaran excursion that morning, all sunscreen and tropical drinks, And by the time we were back at the resort, he was on his phone in a way that had a different texture than usual. Tight, a little distant. He tried the account from his phone in the resort bathroom. I know because I heard him typing the specific cadence of banking app navigation, and then he came out and said casually that he thought there might be a tech issue with the account. I said, I'm sure it'll clear up. He watched me for a second. Yeah, he said, I'm sure it will. That was the moment I think he knew something had changed. He didn't know what. But the smile he gave me after that was working harder than usual, like a machine that requires more power to do the same job. I spent the last 3 days of that honeymoon being the most attentive, affectionate, surface-level perfect version of a new wife I could manage. I also spent those 3 days coordinating with my father's attorney, my own attorney. A woman my college roommate had used in her divorce and recommended without hesitation, and the bank's fraud department. I had documents notarized at the resort's business center while my husband was at the gym. The resort staff, to their credit, asked no questions. By the time our flight home landed at BNA, I had done the following. I had moved my original deposit back to my individual account, with the bank's cooperation and documentation. I had filed a preliminary fraud report that referenced the Atlanta case. I had retained my attorney formally and paid her retainer, and I had forwarded the PI's complete file to my attorney, including the photographs, the meeting logs, and the court record. He found out in stages, which I think was worse for him than finding out all at once would have been. Stage 1, we got home and he discovered the account balance. He brought it up that evening, carefully, framing it as a question. He said he thought there might have been an error. I said I'd had to make a transfer while we were away, a security precaution. I'd meant to mention it. I watched his face process that. Stage 2. 3 days later, my attorney sent a letter to his home address. Our home. The house I was now living in with my husband of 12 days, requesting documentation related to the joint account, citing the fraud report. He came to find me in the kitchen while I was making coffee. He was holding the letter and his voice was very even, which I had learned meant he was frightened. He said, "What is this?" I turned around and looked at him. "I found the photograph," I said, "the one from the Hampton Inn." Silence. "I know about Atlanta," I said, more silence, a different kind. The kind that confirms. "And I know she's in Nashville," I said. "I know you never ended it. I know what the account was for." He sat down at the kitchen table. He put the letter down. He looked at it instead of at me. I watched him calculate visibly, the way you can sometimes see someone running numbers behind their eyes. Finally he said, "I can explain." "You can explain it to my attorney," I said. I poured my coffee. "Her number is on the letter." He tried the affectionate approach first. That same evening, different tactics. He was sorry, he was confused, he'd made terrible choices, he loved me, he'd never meant to hurt me. "Could we please talk about this privately?" Before lawyers got involved. This wasn't who he was, he'd been in a bad place, he'd get counseling. He reached for my hand across the kitchen table, and his eyes were wet, and for approximately 45 seconds I felt the thing I think he was counting on me to feel. And then I remembered the plane. Remembered him sleeping, comfortable, while I sat next to him with a photograph of his girlfriend folded into my carry-on. Remembered how easy it had been for him, how practiced, how the version of him I'd fallen in love with had been a performance calibrated specifically for me. I stood up and I said, "I'll be staying at my parents' for the next few weeks. My attorney will be in touch." The annulment was finalized 4 months later. My attorney negotiated a complete return of my deposit from the joint account, plus fees. The fraud report triggered an inquiry that involved the woman in the blazer as well. Her name was in the transaction records in ways that suggested she'd known about the account and its purpose. That was her problem, legally. Not mine. My ex-husband lost his position at the firm. I don't know the details. I don't need to. What I know is that it happened within 2 months of the annulment. Something about an internal review, and the news reached me through mutual connections in the way that information always eventually does in a city the size of Nashville. The concierge, her name was Bonita, I found this out later, was not a random hotel employee. She was the sister of a woman my father's PI had interviewed during the investigation. She had recognized my husband's name on the reservation list and made a phone call and done what she could with what little time she had. She sent me a card after the annulment. "Congratulations," it said, "on your next chapter." That was all. My father called me the night the annulment was finalized. He was trying not to cry and not entirely succeeding, and he said, "I should have told you sooner." "I'm sorry." I told him the truth. I said, "If you'd told me sooner, I don't think I would have believed you." That's the part that stays with me. Not the money, not the woman in the blazer, not even the photograph. What stays with me is how completely I had trusted a version of someone that had been constructed entirely for my benefit, and how invisible that construction had been to me for 2 full years. He'd been so fluent in exactly the kind of love I needed that I'd never thought to check whether it was real. I think about my students sometimes, the 12-year-olds, with their microscopes and their water cycle diagrams, and how much we try to teach them about evidence and observation and drawing conclusions from what's actually in front of you rather than what you expect to find. I was 30 years old, and I had to learn that lesson in a hotel lobby in Nashville from a woman I'd never met who was brave enough to put something in my hand and walk away. I'm 31 now. I have my own apartment again. A good one with a kitchen I've been slowly learning to actually cook in. I have my original $40,000 intact. I have a father who cried on the phone when the annulment came through, and a best friend who drove 4 hours from Memphis the weekend I moved out to help me pack, and never once said, "I told you so," even though she probably had thoughts. I don't think love makes you blind. I think love makes you selective about what you choose to see. The information is often there. The details are often visible. You just trust so completely that you don't ask the question that would make you look. Sometimes it takes a stranger pressing an envelope into your hand to make you start asking,